Welcome and thank you for joining us. We're going to be exploring KnowledgeWorks' most recent 10-year forecast, charting a new course for education. And we'll be involved in a conversation between myself and three panelists about possibilities for the future of learning and our actions today. And also we'll be making space for attendees to share questions through the Q&A function. I'm Katherine Prince. I work as Vice President of Foresight and Strategy at KnowledgeWorks. So I get to lead our ongoing exploration of the future of learning, where we explore possibilities through publications and through engagements with people working across the education landscape. I am joined today by three esteemed panelists: Claire Romzek, Magnet Coordinator and Educator at Clark County School District in Nevada; Tracy Najera, Vice President, Community Alliance for Child Rights at UNICEF USA; and Lauren McCauley, Vice President of Teaching and Learning at KnowledgeWorks. We'll enter into conversation together shortly, but I'm going to start with a quick overview of some of the highlights from our forecast to ground the conversation. Charting a New Course for Education, which was published in August, looks out 10 years to take a fresh look at possibilities on the horizon for education. And it's really a call to action for education leaders and change makers to ensure that education remains a strong public good over the next decade. It's an invitation for us all to design education systems that are resilient, relevant, and rooted in humanity as the world around education continues to change. This decade ahead seems especially uncertain, with many challenges that we're going to need to manage and mitigate, and also opportunities, some of which might be in unexpected places. But as we explore ways forward and consider where to step in and act toward our aspirations for learning through courageous leadership, we hold the question of how might we create and lead education systems that prioritize learners' humanity, joy, and academic and human development. As with most forecasts that KnowledgeWorks publishes, this one is grounded in drivers of change. Drivers of change describe major forces of change, patterns of trends, and plans and intentions of stakeholders and the like that are suggesting trajectories of change around education that we think will kind of impact what's possible for and within it. As we continue to integrate with AI in various aspects of our lives, it will be, of course, not just working with AI as it exists today, but AI itself will continue to develop. And we're expecting to see impacts on human cognition, identity, and relationships. We're also anticipating that there will be more and more everyday disruptions, whether small or large in scale, and that those will continue to unsettle daily life in school and other learning environments and challenge our established approaches to teaching and learning and educational management. We're also seeing challenges to public institutions that are going to require public education leaders to reimagine how they support learners and collaborate with others across an expanding learning landscape. And lastly, we're seeing a growing relevance gap between young people's realities and what happens in school. That gap will make it increasingly important to design learning that engages students and meets their needs, to push ourselves beyond the ways we've been doing things. When we consider what drivers of change suggest for the future of education, we need to imagine what learning could look like in 10 years. And in this forecast, we did so through provocations, which are bold ideas that help people consider how the future could be different than today. We considered possibilities for how learning experiences and environments could shift, and also what might be possible for learning providers and structures, and educational governance and administration. I'll highlight some of the possibilities from the forecast to help us imagine possibilities and seed the conversation. We could, over the next decade, see dynamic flows in which learning flows in which AI facilitated extreme personalization of learning to meet learners' needs. We could see educators using AI tools to design individual curricula and adaptive daily schedules for individual students. To such an extent, we might even push beyond having set bell schedules in some environments. We could see AI-powered modules and assessments adjust to the needs of students with disabilities as a supplement to the personalized supports provided by educators. We could see, as another option, that AI bots could act as peer coaches during group work, nudging human learners, helping suggest ways forward, helping track progress against learning objectives. Or maybe AI could help learners build social capital by dynamically matching young people who have shared learning objectives. So forming groups on the fly to meet those needs and then finding space and teachers to support them in pursuing their learning goals. Another zone of possibility of provocation is that we could increasingly see schools and learning providers need to design for disruption. Adapting to climate change and other instabilities could become a core design principle for schools and other learning environments. That could mean that schools would need to flex their schedules to accommodate extreme weather or climate disasters. So maybe not having a fixed calendar for each school year, but needing to have more dynamic scheduling in response to what happened. Or maybe schools would need to pass a climate readiness certificate in order to operate, to make sure their infrastructure was sound enough, that they had things like effective climate action plans, maybe other elements. And we might have kind of new structures for supporting learning continuity during disruption. So, for example, community organizations and businesses might get certified by school districts to function as learning centers during emergencies. And maybe in return for doing that, they would get tax breaks. Thinking about learning providers and structures, we could see education, public education, become much more modular than it is today, such that learners and their families and caregivers would be able to configure their own personalized public education systems from among many public options. That could mean that public schools bundled offerings from their own teachers and the teachers of neighboring districts into thematic packages for learners. And maybe those packages would include options such as clubs and other extracurricular activities too. Or within a school district, we could see AI suggest really customized sequences of learning modules for individual learners to make sure that each person was progressing according to their needs. So thinking just beyond course progressions to thinking maybe even more granularly about how learning offerings might be mixed and matched for different learners. In this kind of a future, it's possible there would be more and more partners contributing alongside schools and school districts to support education. If that were the case, districts might consider using AI to vet and onboard those partners, and then to recognize the non-traditional learning that they helped facilitate. Or maybe public schools would have such cultures of innovation and entrepreneurship that they would incubate and fund public education startups and mentor their own teachers in entrepreneurship. So a whole host of possibilities if public education becomes more modular. Alternatively, public education could become more constrained. We could see more and more schools offer streamlined basic education with minimal support from district offices. In this kind of a future, state education agencies could provide adaptive learning modules and artificial general intelligence teachers that helped fill curricular gaps and address teacher shortages. Or maybe we'd have a really strong focus on career preparation, such that corporations would locate skills-based training offices in schools or districts to help coordinate training programs with clear pathways to employment. In this kind of a landscape, we could see more and more youth just step away from public school, step away from school, and organize their own learning through self-teaching and peer-to-peer learning, because school just isn't worth engaging in. And another option in this future is that predatory mega learning enterprises could acquire schools and educational programs in vulnerable communities, further constraining and consolidating available choices. So those are just some of the possibilities on the horizon for education over the next decade. And when we look to the future in this way, we do that partly to generate insight about how we might move forward today and the midterm, to serve as strategic considerations that help us act more wisely and in more informed ways toward our objectives. These are some strategic considerations from KnowledgeWorks forecast. The first of which is that there's a huge opportunity and need to consider how best to position public education as a marketplace of learning expands. So if more and more learning providers are available, more and more kinds of options are available to learners and families, which looks to be the trajectory that we're on, then how might public education contribute, interact with other providers, and think creatively about its own offerings? If the learning landscape does expand in that kind of a way, then learners and their families and caregivers will need support in making informed choices. So there would be opportunities for schools and districts and other learning providers to think about maybe new educator roles that could help guide people in making the choices that suited them best. And there could also be the need for new kinds of platforms and tools that helped learners and families access more information about what was available to them. Equity and access are current and perennial issues, unfortunately, in education, and they could get more pronounced over the next decade. We think there's huge need to look at making funding mechanisms for education equitable, especially as we see more things like education savings accounts facilitate more and more kinds of options. And then also we need to think about how our school quality systems, future versions of today's accountability systems, can ensure equity in a landscape that might end up looking different from today's. There's also a lot of opportunity for learning providers to consider how to operate among networks of networks, to find others who have similar aims, share goals to learn from and exchange practices with, to partner more deeply and extensively with other organizations, and likely has been true in the past, and think about kind of amplifying impact and resources available to them through this kind of hyper-networked approach to coordination. And as educators consider whether and how, when to implement AI in learning environments, or to respond to various disruptions that we see on the horizon, centering young people's developmental impacts will be really key. Trying to anticipate as best we can the short, medium, and long-term effects of our choices on young people's development and well-being can be a central guiding principle as we move over this turbulent decade. And then lastly, we see the need for people working in learning environments and many kinds of roles to develop new skills, widespread AI literacy, greater awareness of climate resilience, whether that's at the infrastructural level for system leaders, or whether it's classroom educators understanding more about how to support learners when they experience disruptions in their lives, or kind of health and well-being impacts from climate change. And then alongside that, education organizations will benefit from increasingly employing adaptive strategy that helps them stay nimble, hold true to what their values and their objectives, but also be resilient and pivot as the world around them and circumstances change. So with that, I'd like to start the conversation with the panelists. I will ask each of you to introduce yourself as you respond to the first question. So that question is, as we think about the drivers of change that I described, what opportunities excite or intrigue you? And Claire, I will invite you to introduce yourself and answer that question first.
Thank you. My name is Claire Romzek. I am the magnet coordinator at a magnet middle school in Nevada. I see some Michiganders on here as well. I'm originally born and raised in Michigan as well. Um, when you talked about these drivers of change, one that really excites me is the use of AI. When we have larger class sizes, we have things like that. Thinking about how to personalize learning is sometimes very overwhelming for teachers. And so having that tool to be able to have AI help you with what would make a personalized path, I think just opens so many doors for opportunity.
Yeah, that's an exciting direction to keep for us to talk about more. Tracy, I'll invite you to introduce yourself and share what's exciting or intriguing you.
Yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Tracy Najera, and I'm with UNICEF USA. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio, so very much, aware of the Ohio and Midwest landscape. And thank you so much for asking me to join this conversation. In terms of your question about what excites me and intrigues me the most, I would say that there's three main areas. These are areas that I think that we're hearing, at least I'm hearing repeatedly, not just domestically here in the United States, but with other young people, youth leaders, and educators globally that are working in this space and looking at, futures and the future that we need to start preparing for, thinking about. Number one is really around inclusive education. When we talk about, the ability and the promise of technology in education and AI in particular, there's also this ability to personalize learning, more targeted and more tailored. And when I think about my own kids and I think about the kids that I've known, they all need something a little bit different, whether it's, through an IEP or because they're gifted or, just the kids learn at different rates in different subject areas. So thinking about teaching at the right level and using technology and AI to do that, to free up teachers, time to be, maybe spending more time with certain kids or, and certain strategies. The other thing that really intrigues me a lot also is student voice and agency and what we can do and how we can leverage their energy and their know-how and expertise to improve the educational experience for all. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, so I'm hearing an early theme emerge about the potential of AI to help teachers do things that it's hard to find up time to do, and also free up teachers' time to really be and support learners in really critical ways. But Lauren, I'll invite you to introduce yourself and come into the conversation.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren McCauley. I am the Vice President of Teaching and Learning at KnowledgeWorks, and I am currently in Columbia, South Carolina. As I was reflecting on this question, I was first reflecting on this idea that one of the most difficult things about education, and I would assume anyone on this call would count themselves as an education change maker. And one of the hardest things about changing education is it's the only profession in the world in which everyone is an expert, because we all did education and we all probably did it in a very similar way. And we're all fighting the fight that it was good enough for me, or even when it wasn't good enough for me, right? Like it should still be that way. And it has been incredibly difficult to change. And so, to use an age-old quote, maybe this is the time where we don't let a good crisis go to waste. And while it is incredibly difficult to think about the challenges that we're facing, the climate crisis, this relevance gap, thinking about eroding public trust. And these are all things that we need to work on improving. But maybe these are some of the things that push us towards the change that we know we need to seek in education. And so it's then taking advantage of the AI possibilities that we've talked about. I get really scared and nervous when I think about public funds that are flowing into private settings. And we often talk about that in a negative, but where might be some of the positives in, what it might mean in a more micro level? What would it mean to start to focus on really digging in on those durable skills that we want students to have, that we somehow struggle to figure out how we incorporate in our current day to day. We struggle to think about how we use time differently, but what if we're forced to because we're missing more and more days due to the climate crisis? And again, we don't want to be facing these, but we are. And so we're going to have to start planning for them. Let's be proactive in that planning and not just let it happen to us, and come up with not just solutions that respond to the problem, but the solutions that are like, wow, we should have been doing it like this anyway, because it's what's best for our learners.
So this could really be a time that forces us to question a lot of assumptions about how things can and must work in education, and then thereby create space for the things that we have been trying to do for a long time and know are good for young people.
Absolutely.
So conversely, we know, and we've been alluding to the fact that there are a lot of challenges on the horizon. I'm wondering from each of you what challenges really stand out. Tracy, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I'm looking at the challenges, there's always opportunities, right, with some of these challenges. But the one that I think stands out the most is eroding public institutions. So eroding trust, trust in terms of, what's true, whether or not certain institutions within our society are those that people find credible. So there's this growing trust gap. And I think about, like, what are ways that we can bridge this? What are ways that well, first of all, that institutions can do a better job, right, of supporting that trust, and that individuals can also feel a sense of confidence. And this is where I want to lean in on, the opportunity of student agency and student voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I totally get what Lauren's saying. Everyone feels like they're an expert in education because they've been through school, right, or public education, or even if you haven't, that's the one profession everyone feels that they have like expertise in. But I'm not suggesting necessarily that everyone is an expert at curriculum, but everyone's an expert in the experience that they want to have, right? When they're going through school, when they're going through class, when they're, either sitting or working in groups or whatever that is, how they want to be treated or how they want to be, engaged in that, whether it be as a co-creator of it. And this could also help with the relevance piece. When young people are engaged and when they feel like they've got a stake in something and they know they have a voice, and either it's creation or how they're communicating the importance of it. And I think that's an area that we can really, leverage to emphasize, the trust, to emphasize confidence, to make them part of the solution. And I feel like there's a lot of districts around the country that are starting to do this, whether it be, having a young person as part of their school board, or having, like, at the building level, not just a student council, but, students and young people who are working hand in hand with administrators and teachers on issues of that building, whether it be in social emotional spaces or curriculum or other components. And I feel like, schools are a microcosm of our society. So why not start there? To build that trust in institutions, starting with the school building. So
Mhm.
and that for me is the most intriguing. And I also think that that's probably the thing that takes the less technology, right?
Mhm.
That takes the fewest amount of interactions or not interactions, but interventions. It
Mhm.
really depends on one adult, right? And one young person to start it off, to start that conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, and then so really hoping to grow from there to a real culture of belonging, inclusion, a really strong learning community of people together in this space. Mm. Claire,
I'd
what
love,
challenge? Go
I'd love
ahead.
to chime in. Yes. I think Lauren, really hit it on the nail on the head earlier when she was saying, a lot of changes that happen because everybody has a way that they think school should be and how to do school, right? And I think what Tracy's saying is amazing. Yes, I think we can get that student voice. The students are talking. They're telling you what they want out of school. We are hearing and seeing with absentee rates and things like that that they're not happy with the way school is. But I think one of the biggest challenges is still that grading system and having those GPAs and having those traditional ways of getting a leg up into college and after high school. And I think that is one of the things and the mindsets that are keeping people at, well, it needs to be this, and you need to do this to get the A to get to the next step, right? And so again, with that trust, and I think that's the biggest challenge, is how do we build the trust that the pathway that a student is pursuing because it's personalized and is still going to help have those opportunities in the future. And it's hard to say, well, we're getting them prepared for jobs that aren't even existing yet because it's hard for people to, be able to see into the future, right? And be safe to know that your kids' future is going to be prosperous. So I think that challenges and then just like the legislative challenges of like what is expected for each kid to have coming
Mhm.
out of the high school middle schools, the credits, things like that. And so how do we disrupt this and find that path where it doesn't have to be so standardized and it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be so competitive with like GPAs and things like that to get to the next level.
So it sounds like you're finding those legislative requirements and the culture around things like GPAs being really constraining to education innovation.
I think so, yes. And our school is innovating and we're changing the way we grade and things like that. And we get pushback. Honestly, we get more pushback from educators as just, well, how does that affect the GPA and things like that. So there's definitely those traditional mindsets that we are all been working in for so long that it's so ingrained. And so we need to figure out, we need to be working with higher education as well. More community for, is it internships? Is it things like that to help continue that pathway, whatever happens in education? How are we making sure that those opportunities are out there past graduation?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think for me, as I was reading the forecast, one of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea of the relevance gap. And I don't, it's not new, but I think it's growing. And we need to do some deep soul searching about the essential content and skills that we're expecting to teach and students to learn in K-12, especially in the age of AI. And I don't think that we ever fully adjusted to the information age and the internet age. And now we're in the AI age and it's only compounding. And we are still expecting students to memorize lists of things like all the rivers here in South Carolina. It's like, I don't know what those are, but I had to regurgitate them at some point. I can look those up, right? And now imagine what I can do with AI. And already it's transforming what we're doing. And living the relevance gap right now. I have a sixth grader, and y'all, he's full on sixth grade, and he's questioning everything. And he was trying to get Siri to do his math homework the other day. And I was like, you cannot have her do this for you. And he turns and he looks at me and he goes, Mom, you're using Chat GPT right now. Why is that okay? But what I'm doing is not okay. And we had to have this conversation about how I have this foundation of skills that helps me know when AI is giving me the right information. I can review it critically. I know when I put a formula into Excel, if it's, giving me a semi-right answer or not. So I was explaining to him, like, this is what you need to be learning so that when you're using these other tools, like and you can do that critical thinking piece. And he had no idea what I was talking about. And I said, okay, the calculator. Now you can use the calculator to do your difficult question. He goes, oh, okay, Mom, I get it. But we really, really are still, again, expecting, like, you need to do all that math by hand. You need to memorize all of this. Um, how much of that is really necessary? And when we're re-examining, we need to be very careful that we're not taking away opportunities from students. And so what is that essential knowledge that is still preserving all the future careers that students might pursue after they graduate, but stop falling on the sword of, you have to learn all of these things that are in many ways holding our students back. And in that too, and I know we've heard this time and again, but I think the relevance gap is largest when we consider the skills that our learners need to have, not just the content. And I firmly believe that K-12 has a role to play in fostering those critical thinking and collaboration skills. And we do that. It's not that it's something novel. We don't do communication and collaboration in school. We just have to be more strategic about it and think about how we honor it. And as again, that age-old adage goes, what gets assessed gets taught, what gets reported gets taught, without going overboard and letting the pendulum swing too far. How are we adding that value into how we're looking at skills? Because those are incredibly relevant to our learners, and into the workforce that they're going to be graduating into.
Well, and I think too, not just strategic about how we're teaching like critical thinking and collaboration, but being more explicit and letting
Yeah.
kids know these are the skills they are learning. So just like we're saying you're learning multiplication right now, we are building your communication skills. We're building your critical thinking skills,
Yeah.
and really linking it so they understand the purpose behind some of those things.
Yeah, and I would also just add, I love all of that, and I would add to it, the why of it. I mean, how many times have you heard? I've heard this, like I'm pretty sure the whole time my kids were in school. When am I ever going to use this? When am I ever going to use this? I'm like, you don't understand. You're going to use this all the time, and at least certain parts of it all the time. I don't think a day goes by where I'm not trying to communicate clearly with people or work collaboratively with them, or even, just critically think through, what are solutions to these problems, or to these challenges that we're facing as an organization or as a group or what have you. I think all of those skills, are so critical and so essential, no matter where you are. I think that the personalized and project-based, together are very much important because when you have young people that are, students of any age, when they're able to speak to each other clearly, when they're able to collaborate on a project and solution find together and not just leave it on one person to figure it out. I've been in those groups before, but do it together. I mean, I think that powerful learning comes from that. And I also think that there's a sense of mastery in the content, that they're also gaining. So I think that those are all critical pieces, but I agree. I mean, just boiling it down, what are the essential skills what are the essential almost mindsets that you have to be successful? You know, despite the changing, climate of the market or other systems and challenges that we might be facing.
I'll just chime in one more time with that. Once had my son ask me, why does it matter if I'm 78? When I'm 70, will it have mattered that I got a C in that class, right? And no, to the point of the grades, right? The grades are something that's driving us to one point, but it's those skills that are going to matter when you're 60, 70 years old that will transfer. And so they need to understand that.
Yeah, and there's this kind of question you all have been describing for learners saying, like, what's the purpose of this? But also, I think we're kind of alluding to like broader questions of purpose of our education settings and systems. You know, there's an expectation clearly that to help people get ready for life after school, and especially with career readiness. And yet, there's so much else that we could bring into that. So, like, that's another lens it could be fruitful to bring as we consider how we're designing for the future. We look to the future based on changes that are happening today, and we're trying not to make unfounded projections, but we're always looking for like signals of change, these early indicators of how things might be shifting. I'm curious where you're seeing signs of change in your context. And Lauren, I'll invite you to start first this time.
Yeah. I think what really came to mind for me as I reflected on this was the climate crisis and this idea of like climate crisis meets everyday disruptions. And last year, I have two boys, and in our district, they missed 10 days of school because of weather related days out of school. And so in South Carolina, for us, that most often comes either because of hurricanes and if any of you live in snowy areas, you can laugh at me. But if it looks remotely like snow, we close school because you don't want us driving. But this was 3 of those days were because of Hurricane Helene, but the rest of them were not events that anyone would have considered major events. Again, it was like, okay, there was a little bit of snow, or when the winds are too high, they can't run the buses because the buses might tip over. Like it's these smaller things that happened, but there were so many last year that added up to 10 days. We've not had any this year. But that means if that continues, that's 10 days that the fifth graders this year are learning that my son did not get last year. And we have plans and we know how to recover. Like if there is a fire or really major event, we put plans in place to make sure that students have other learning opportunities. But when they miss those everyday disruptions here and there, we don't have great plans in place for that. It's just mislearning. And things like that are going to happen more and more often. And I don't think no one anticipated we were going to miss 10 days of school last year. It just happened. And so what do we do when it continues to just happen? Because that will start to add up very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in as well in terms of like what signs of change. And I have to draw on something I witnessed back in June. I had an opportunity to do like a 4-week study trip in Brazil, and it was focused on education. And one of the things that really struck me was they really meet the learner where they are. And I think that this is maybe they're experiencing a change faster than we are. But what I mean by that are there are learners that for some reason their learning is disrupted in high school. They have to go back to high school to finish or to complete credits. There are learners who have graduated, but they have to upskill because of a changing economy. and they were basically using high schools in separate shifts. So they had day shift high school, night shift high school. They also recognized that some students learn better in the evening than in the morning. And it could have grown from, maybe the student population grew fast, so they had to go to several shifts of learning. But then they realized that, hey, maybe this works for different types of students based on their situations. So they had some kids that were doing apprenticeship programs during the day and doing high school credits in the evening. And it really just struck me how, there wasn't a stigma attached to this. There was, I think, more of a recognition that, you know, people learn at different rates, but then also they have different priorities. Not all of them, wanted to go to college. They can make a great living in trades. And I think that, this relevance gap, and meeting students where they are and also having flexible learning opportunities. I think that's something that I've seen communities here in the US also embracing. But it really struck me when I was in Brazil, how they were doing it in very tangible ways. Um, the other thing that also was interesting was their treatment of students with special needs. There they have a paraprofessional in the school district we visited who was assigned to every student who had an IEP or that equivalent. And they went with them to every single class, make sure that they were able to access the materials, that they had what they needed, that there was consistency through the day, and that supplement to the in-class instruction. And I'm sure that is very expensive, but also it's a show of commitment, right? So when we're talking about every child and every child has a right to education, every child needs to learn, we're going to give every child what they need to accomplish that. I mean, I saw districts walking the walk, and I think that's something that, you know, I I think that's something that we should see more of here, as we see and recognize learning differences more and more and think about how best to teach them at the right level.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for sharing those examples. Claire, what are you seeing that's kind of pointing toward future possibilities?
I have a little different take on this question. I was just thinking about things that are already happening that seem like where we want to go. So like more project-based learning I'm seeing in our district is a push. My school definitely is using project-based learning. So helping with that relevancy gap, right? Because if we can have a project and we're learning through that, something that a kid is passionate about or really wants to answer a question or solve a question, they're learning through that project. Which might also be another way to help with those unexpected days out of school. If you're working on a project, that goes over different subject matters, you could still be working on that, from home and learning through that project. I also think that helps with being able to meet with kids where they are. So if you're working on a project and a math concept, and we've got somebody who maybe has a hole that needs to be filled in that concept, while other kids are working on the project, you could be pulling kids and giving those, one-on-one instructions. So I think there are those pockets of change already that are happening that I think is awesome. I also will speak that I'm in a magnet school, and there's magnet schools all across the country. And those are schools that they're choice schools. So I'm still a public school, but students apply and then they have a lottery to get in. So parents are looking at those programs where we're a STEM academy. So my student is interested in, robotics and computer science and architecture and construction, where another school might be theater and the arts, and so there already are some of those choices. I think just now amplifying that a little bit more. And in those choice schools, a lot of times we have the ability to be a little more innovative, which is nice, but then we still have those parameters, right? So we still have pushback along that. So I think there are definite pockets of change happening that I think are going in the right direction, and they're kind of the trailblazers for where we at. I'll also speak a little bit to Nevada Portrait of a Learner, which is something that I've been working with for the last 3 years, and just helping to have those durable skills, not just those academic skills. And so weaving those in too is the change that needs to happen. Like we were talking about, having those explicit connections between why you're doing a certain activity in the classroom, and how it's helping you learn not just the content, but those skills that will help out in the workplace.
Mhm.
And I think just adding one thing onto that, as we have the conversation about durable skills and how essential they are, and I think when you're having this broad conversation, no one says, I don't believe that. Like, why do we need those durable skills? But when the rubber meets the road, it feels extra. And like, we don't have time to do that because we've got to get through this, 1 hour science class. And when, but in terms of signs of like, we need this, the workforce is screaming from the top of their lungs, like, we need these skills. And while the purpose of K-12 is not solely to prepare students for the workforce, like, it is certainly a piece of it. And these are skills that are going to help you in every aspect of your life. And so and yet, like, we continue to say, yes, yes, I hear you, but we're not shifting in what we're doing. But I think we need to look more towards, but here's the evidence that it's a need. And so how do we adjust? Because it's not just folks at KnowledgeWorks saying that we need these durable skills. It's across the board, the workforce and all these other places are saying, absolutely, our students need this. So we need to respond in kind in K-12.
Mhm. And Claire, there's a question in the chat as to how Nevada rolled out the Portrait of a Learner to educators. I wonder if you could briefly address that.
Very candidly say it is being rolled out. So we're not quite there yet. It was being built the last few years. And currently, right now, our state superintendent is now our district superintendent, and we're working on rolling that out. Currently, it is some targeted informational sessions. So email me, I can keep you posted.
Thank you. So we've been exploring a lot, but it's kind of happening to education, but we know we also are all shaping its future. So I'm curious what you think people should consider doing kind of near or midterm to maximize the kinds of opportunities we've been exploring and minimize the risks.
I'll just jump in. I think with exploring the opportunities, I think thoughtful experimentation. You know, I love when school districts, when school buildings, when there is a group of teachers that are really interested in a topic and their administrators allow them the freedom to do a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, oh, we just pulled this out of the air, but I mean, a really thoughtful pilot. And I've seen this so many times. And in some cases, my children have been in those classrooms and have benefited from it. So I'm a real believer in allowing that freedom for experimentation. And, teachers have the best ideas when it comes to what's in the classroom, what's going to work, what's not going to work. What are some ideas worth trying? And also, how can we get students more involved or more engaged in this learning? So, number one, freedom to experiment. I think a second one is professional learning around technology and what can and I don't want to say can't, but how it can best be leveraged, right? For teaching at the right level or for personalized learning, because there are a cadre of individuals out there. I will admit I'm kind of one of them. I'm very timid when it comes to technology. It takes me. I'm not an early adopter. I'll let other people adopt first. But I think that bridging some of those gaps in confidence, and freedom to pilot and experiment and to learn, I think all of those things are things that are needed, right? And kudos to the districts and to the buildings that are encouraging those behaviors now.
I think making small changes within the parameters that you already have um, is good. So keeping that trust with, so for example, I piloted a few years ago, my last year in the classroom, an ungraded classroom. So we weren't, doing traditional grades all the way across, but of course I had to have a quarter grade and a semester grade, right? And I talked to parents. Grading is a communication tool, right? Of where your kid is at and to the student as well as to the parent. And so I changed my communication. I promised them that they would have a weekly email from me with some information to hold conversations at home to help see where your child might be at. And that they would not be surprised when it came to the quarter and the semester, that they would know ahead of time if I felt like their student was not going to get a decent grade, right? And so, and the students helped to decide what their grade was with communication. So that's just a quick example of me being able to make a small change and kind of collect some data on student learning in that I could later present. And I did have administrative backup to that as well. I didn't just, do it, but doing those small things and then while doing that, communicating what you're doing and how it's changing and how to keep that trust in that process with stakeholders.
I think we have to make sure that we are planning for the future and not just letting it happen to us. And it is so incredibly difficult in our personal lives, much less when you get into the ebb and flow of the school year. And I have to educate these students in front of me, and my students are hungry, and I need to attend to these other needs, to pause and lift our heads up and say, but I need to look to the future and what's coming, and we need to plan for this. But we have to find the time to do that. Future is coming for us no matter what. So let's plan for it. And as we talked about earlier, that then we're not responding to the crisis. We're planning systems that are resilient, that can respond to those crises, but are built for what's best for students. And I think that centers on focusing on these durable, future ready skills. It's having our flexible learning systems, whether that's within the confines of your school building or hopefully thinking more broadly about the whole community as our learning environment and how we respond to that. But all of that takes that sort of future oriented mindset in order to make it possible. And then nodding to a question that we received, that we've talked a lot about what needs to happen in the K-12 system. We can't do this alone. Teacher prep has to change and has to evolve so that we are preparing teachers for this new system that we're talking about. And someone had asked, what skills and mindsets do those educators need? They need the durable skills that we've been talking about, those communication and critical thinking and lifelong learning skills. And imagine if we'd started to be explicit about teaching our future teachers when they were in kindergarten those skills, and they would be fully prepared to teach in this environment now. But most of them didn't get to experience this. So I think if we can really work on how we're changing teacher prep programs and getting those programs involved, invite them in. If you have a really innovative school program, please take the student teachers and let them see your environments, and that is going to go a long way, I think, in starting to make this change possible.
Thank you all for the dialogue. It's been fun exploring these opportunities and challenges on the horizon with you. We're just about at the end of our time. So just as we wrap up, want to just remind everybody that there's a lot of that we have a lot of agency as we've been exploring. That it's on us to make sure that the future of education is a powerful, inclusive force for good, and that the stakes are high now. So thank you all for engaging with this exploration of how we might begin to do that. And then if anyone hasn't yet gotten a link to KnowledgeWorks charting the forecast on the future of education, this QR code. provides a link to it to try a new course for education. Thank you all. I appreciate your time and attention today. If you'd like to follow up with any of us, here are our email addresses.